there's a few things that I want to talk about, and there's a few things that are a little confusing to me. Um, I've since starting the show have kind of gone on an interesting journey as a leftist. I still consider myself to be a leftist, an anti-imperialist leftist, an old school liberal, as you will, one who believes in freedom of speech, freedom of a press, believes in bringing home all closing down these bases and bringing these people home, our troops home, and stop spreading death and destruction around the world. But I've also had this quest of going on and seeing elections in Nicaragua, seeing elections in Honduras, in Brazil, in Colombia, being an election integrity activist. And that has allowed me to get in the room with Trumpers a lot. Just recently I was at a Kerry Lake event, and Kerry Lake is very pro Donald Trump. My question to you right off the bat, Dr. West, because this is a little bit confusing to me. You have said right out the jump that you are planning to go into Trump land and to speak to Trumpers and try to connect with them. How can you connect with them if you continuously call Trump a neo-fascist? I mean, how are we going to extend an olive branch where we're just pretty much shunning people away? I mean, I would also like to talk about that word neo-fascist when we're done, because I think it's a BS word. It is absent from the original meaning of fascism, which is actually corporatism, the merger of state and corporations, where we keep our eye on the prize. Neo-fascist is more of a term where we look at our citizens. It seems like it's been weaponized. But first things first, how do we connect with Trumpers, Dr. West, if we're going to just shun them right off the bat?
Oh, but I'm not shunning them at all, though, brother. The first thing you do when you approach another person is you don't see a stereotype, you see a human being. And you zero in on their wounds and their scars, but also their perceptions of the world. But you have to be honest. I have to be honest in terms of how I understand the world. You see, so when I come in and I've already honestly said, well, I think the Pied Piper that you're following at the moment is a gangster. And I define what gangster activity is: saying and doing things with no accountability, no answerability, taking no responsibility. And then I say, as a neo-fascist, neo-fascism is scapegoating the most vulnerable. So you can attack the immigrants, you can attack black folk, you can attack gays and lesbians, rather than confronting the most powerful. And the most powerful is Wall Street and military, not in rhetoric, but in your policies. In your policies. So I would tell him, look at Brother Trump and myself in terms of militarism. Now, he says that he's a populist. He says that he wants to pull back on big military, but every budget was a expansion of the military budget. Every move was an attempt to justify, put it this way, that he so often would want to justify that expansionism, just like the Democrats. I mean, Democrats are tied to big military too. So I'd have to be honest. So in that sense, it's not an attempt to smear and to trash. It's being very honest and candid. And they can come right back at me and use certain categories and certain names. And I would say, I'm glad you're honest about what you think about me. Now, let me tell you why you're wrong. If you think Brother Trump is not a gangster, tell me what your definition of gangster. If you think he's not a neo-fascist, tell me what your definition of neo-fascism is. Now, that's part of what we'll do today in terms of your definition of neo-fascism, more corporatist and so forth and so on. But mine is using the flag, using narrow forms of patriotism to mobilize citizens, usually feeling as if they're wounded and under attack, and then scapegoating the most vulnerable. That's what we saw in fashions of the past. It could be Jews in Germany and so forth. So that in that sense, you can't have a genuine Socratic dialogue or conversation if you're not honest and candid about what your perception is at the moment. Now, I might be wrong. I'm there to learn and listen from the Trump brothers and sisters, right? I might be wrong. But when I see xenophobia, when I see racism, when I see transphobia, when I see homophobia, I call it out. They say, well, Brother West, it's not that. then convince me. But
Yeah,
most
yeah.
importantly, I'm showing them I care about their suffering, and I want to make sure all of them as human beings and fellow citizens gain access to Medicare quality, education quality, jobs with a living wage, safe community, the same thing that any other fellow citizen deserves or any other human
Yeah.
being deserves. So that's the beginning of that dialogue, my brother.
Okay, but see, listen, I used to use this term. I do a lot of work in Latin America, right? I wanted to send you this video I have of Cuba, of me trying to build a bridge where I go to Cuba and I bring a lot of baseball equipment and bats and balls, and I'm just trying to humanize people to get that whole
Right.
anti-communist sentiment out of their
That's
mind.
right.
Now, the first thing I did, Dr. West, is I removed a term that is often used. It was used by Castro. It's gusano. It's calling people a worm, right? But if I want to convince and I want to have conversations with Marco Rubio, if I see him, or Paulina Aguilar, or Bob Menendez, if I use that word gusano, it immediately shuts things down. And I feel that's what neo-fascism does. But I think the real part where people have a problem with is that you call Brother Biden a neoliberal disaster, when if you just put it on paper right now, and I'll tell you this right now, I think that sometimes people look at this and they're like, well, Dr. West is calling him a neoliberal disaster and calls Trump a neo-fascist, when the corporate entities are way more invested in President Biden than they are Donald Trump, that he's kind of carrying a little water for Biden, and he's making that excuse that it was okay to vote for Biden over Donald Trump, which I think, was completely wrong. If you told me today, and I'm never going to vote for Biden, I'm never going to vote for Donald Trump, but if you put a gun to my head, Dr. West, and said I had to vote for either one of the two, I'm voting for Donald Trump. We're on the brink of World War III here now. Can you see the hypocrisy there? And can you maybe square that circle right there and kind of give us a little insight to this whole, like, Biden gets this treatment, but Trump gets that treatment?
Yeah, I mean, one is that we could have been on the brink of World War III with Trump too. Anybody who's head of a militaristic and aggressive empire can lead the world toward war. He could have been with North Korea. I mean, there's all kinds of different possibilities in that regard. So that if we use solely the possibility of nuclear holocaust, nuclear exchange, the head of any empire, when it comes to the most powerful empire in the history of the world, the United States, it could be Trump or Biden in that regard. No, I think part of the difference here is the difference between a catastrophe and a disaster is that I think you would have to acknowledge that when it comes to a gestures toward rights and liberties, gestures toward trade union activities, gestures toward trying to deal with voting rights and trying to deal with gerrymandered voting patterns, you see, that the disastrous Democratic Party, rhetorically, symbolically, but at times even concretely, are able to move in the direction toward those Black voters and toward those trade unionists and so forth than was Trump. What I mean by, see, the problem is that both of these parties have such a vicious dimension of them that they do look so similar. It looks similar. Take to the brothers right now in Jenkins and Parker in Mississippi. Parties look similar. Look similar on the West Bank, in the Middle East. Parties look similar. If you're arguing that Trump is better than Biden across the board, given his attempts to reshape government, viciously attack immigrants, viciously attack Black folk, viciously attack progressives like yourself and myself as leftists, always Marxists and communists and so forth, then that's a different kind of argument. I mean, I think the important thing is to build an alternative to both.
Gotcha.
We've got to begin to create lenses that are highly available to people so they can see the ways in which both parties are parasitic on each other, and that the neoliberalism feeds the neo-fascism and vice versa. Now, if we don't want to use neo-fascism, I don't know what term you would use. Authoritarian populism, is that a term that you would go with?
Maybe. I mean, the term neo-fascism seems to be twisted so it doesn't, carry the intent of the original word fascism. It seems more divisive, where it's pitting people against each other. Because I got news for you, Dr. West. Believe you me, conservatives were concerned about immigrants coming across the board way before Donald Trump, and that's not a new thing with him.
That's
Maybe
true.
he gave them a little strength to talk about this, but I think a lot of the problems or the issues we disagree on with our conservative brothers and sisters have always been there. You know what I'm saying? Trump just made it a little bit more open to say these things, which I like, because then we can get to the problems, because we can identify, the issue a lot clearer. But
I just don't like the hatred, though, brother. I don't like the venom and the vitriol. I mean, the thing about it, for me to call Trump a neo-fascist and for him to call new immigrants rapists and criminals, I mean, how could one be supportive of a Trump using that language? And yet, when I call somebody a neo-fascist, I have a definition of it. Yeah. Isn't it the case that he still in policy supported cutting taxes for the rich, facilitating Wall Street expansion, military increase, waving the flag, reinforcing the militarism abroad? See, that would be where I would want to
I got you.
Impart zero in on, just as a conversation. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I got you. But policy-wise, we can start lining these things up. Biden is guilty of all these things. Biden wrote the crime bill, and we know how devastating that was. Donald Trump, First Step Act, right? A little bit different. You know what I'm saying? We can go back and forth on the situation. I think the solution is what you said, is building something outside these two establishment candidates and whatnot. But let's get into
the important thing is, though, having exactly the conversation we're having now across political and ideological lines, and very much across racial lines, because you cannot deny that white supremacy has played a very important role in Trump's social base. Now, all of them are not racist. No, not at all. In fact, 1 out of 10 voted for my dear brother Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
But the weaponizing and the mobilizing of racist tropes and racist narratives has been a very important role.
Yeah.
In Donald
we have
Trump's
a guy.
project.
We got a guy who said on the floor of Congress that I don't want my kids growing up in a racial jungle. You know what I'm saying? We got the Patriot Act. We got Iraq. We got policies that I think personally it would take Donald Trump 3 more terms to catch up to what Joe Biden has done since back in the days. And that's just, and once again, I'm not going to vote for either one of them. I think we should stay away from
neither
them.
one of us are talking about voting for neither one. I just want to be clear about and honest. I love your talk about truth shall set us free. None of us have a monopoly on truth. Truth is jagged edge. It cuts a lot of different ways, and that's why a certain kind of humility that we both trying to exemplify is important, so we can learn. But you're absolutely right. But what we're saying is the white supremacy cuts through both of them so deeply and thickly.
Yeah. And bottom line, at the end of the day, Donald Trump mentioned that we should disband NATO, and Joe Biden has strengthened it. And if we have World War III, then nothing else matters. That should be the number one issue on the table right now, is avoiding nuclear holocaust. And Joe Biden, I thought, has brought us a lot closer to that, especially with the people he's picked. The Blinkens, the Sullivans, the Victoria Nuland. But
yes. Well, no, the Nulands was in the Trump administration too, right there, connected to Ukraine. I mean, part of the continuity of the two parties is precisely manifest in how
he got rid of her, though. He did fire her.
Parties doing different administration.